What if one act of courage could turn your life upside down? A 10-year-old black boy, Marcus, witnesses a fiery crash, and without thinking twice, he rushes into the flames to save a police officer, an officer who has never treated him kindly. His actions that day don't just save a life, they set into motion a series of events that will leave everyone speechless. It's a hot summer afternoon, and Marcus is riding his bike down a quiet neighborhood street when a loud crash and the sound of screeching tires catch his attention. His heart races as he looks ahead to see a police car flipped onto its side, flames rising from the engine, and the blaring sirens filling the air. Time seems to slow down as panic spreads throughout the street. People are scrambling, unsure of what to do, but Marcus knows one thing for certain. He has to act. His eyes narrow, determination overtaking his fear. Without thinking twice, he ditches his bike, sprinting toward the wreckage. The heat from the flames is overwhelming, but Marcus doesn't hesitate. He remembers the lessons his mother taught him. When someone's in trouble, you help, no matter who they are. He pushes past the fear gripping his chest and focuses on the officer trapped inside. The officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair, is struggling, his face contorted in pain and confusion. Marcus doesn't know his name, but he knows one thing for sure. The officer's life is in his hands. The man had never been kind to Marcus before. He had seen the officer treat him with disdain, the looks of judgment in his eyes every time their paths crossed. But none of that matters now. This is about doing what's right. Marcus takes a deep breath and dives toward the wrecked police car. He's small, but his determination is mighty. He manages to pry open the door, wincing at the smoke and heat pouring out from the car. The officer's eyes meet his for the first time, and in that moment, Marcus sees something. Fear, but also gratitude. "Hold on, I'm going to get you out of here," Marcus says, his voice steady despite the chaos. His hands shake as he reaches to pull the officer free. The officer tries to protest, but Marcus won't stop. He knows he has to act fast. Every second counts. He wraps his arms around the officer, struggling to lift him up, dragging him away from the flames that are growing by the second. Sweat drips down Marcus's face, and his heart pounds in his chest. He can feel the heat against his skin, but he keeps moving, dragging the officer to safety, away from the wreckage that could explode at any moment. Finally, with all the strength he has left, Marcus gets the officer far enough away from the car. His breath comes in ragged gasps as he collapses on the ground beside the officer, both of them covered in soot, the air heavy with the smell of smoke. The officer, still dazed, looks up at Marcus, confusion in his eyes. Why'd you help me?" the officer asks, his voice weak but filled with wonder. Marcus, panting, looks the officer in the eye, his expression firm. Because it was the right thing to do. The officer, unable to respond, simply nods, his gratitude now clear. The sound of sirens grows louder as emergency responders arrive, rushing to take over. Marcus stands up slowly, his body aching from the effort, but he doesn't look back. He's done what he came to do. The crowd, which had been standing at a distance, watches in silence. They've seen the whole thing, the boy who had no reason to help the officer, yet did so without hesitation. Marcus doesn't know it yet, but this act of bravery will change everything for him. It will make the people who once doubted him stop and think. It will turn the officer's life upside down, and it will make the world look at this young black boy in a new light, just as he looked at the officer, unbiased, without hesitation, and with the courage to do what's right. But for now, Marcus simply walks away from the scene, his heart still racing, as the firefighters begin to douse the flames and paramedics tend to the officer. He doesn't need recognition. He knows he did what needed to be done, but what comes next will be far bigger than he could ever imagine. Marcus's story. Marcus, a 10-year-old black boy, lives in a modest neighborhood that is often overlooked by the city's elite. Raised by his single mother, who works tirelessly to provide for him, Marcus has grown up understanding the value of hard work and perseverance. Despite the struggles they face, Marcus's mother instilled in him the importance of maintaining his dignity and treating others with respect, no matter their background. Though life hasn't been easy, Marcus's heart remains kind. He has faced his share of hardships, including prejudice and discrimination, but he has learned to rise above it. The community he lives in may be economically disadvantaged, but it is rich in character, and Marcus is always quick to help when someone is in need. Whether it's helping a neighbor with groceries or standing up for a schoolmate who's being bullied, Marcus has always exhibited a bravery beyond his years. Yet, it's not just his actions that set him apart. Marcus carries an inherent optimism that helps him see the good in people, even when they don't show him the same kindness in return. It's a hope that things will change, not only for him, but for the people around him as well. Despite being subjected to the kind of racial prejudice that many of his peers have also faced, Marcus holds his head high. His resilience and unwavering sense of justice make him someone his community can rely on, even when things seem at their worst. Every day, Marcus faces the world through a lens of optimism, believing that one day people will see him for who he truly is, not just a black boy from a poor neighborhood, but a young individual with a heart full of hope and potential. And while he still dreams of a better future, he knows that helping others along the way is the most important thing he can do. The officer's story. Officer Johnson, a seasoned police officer who's patrolled the streets of Marcus's neighborhood for years, has seen his fair share of crime and chaos. Known for his tough stance, Officer Johnson is one of the many officers who have been a part of the city's law enforcement for decades. He has come to view the people in the neighborhoods he patrols through a biased lens, shaped by years of experience and ingrained prejudices. While Officer Johnson is by no means a rookie, his experiences have led him to hold narrow views of the people he is meant to protect and serve. The hard-working folks in Marcus's neighborhood, especially black residents, have often found themselves on the receiving end of his disdain. Despite Marcus's young age and innocent demeanor, Officer Johnson has always treated him with indifference, speaking to him condescendingly, if at all. Too often, Officer Johnson has made assumptions based on the color of Marcus's skin. He's dismissed him as another troublemaker from the wrong side of town. Racism and privilege have influenced his actions, and his arrogance only fueled his belief that people like Marcus, who come from low-income backgrounds, are undeserving of his respect or empathy. For Officer Johnson, authority is everything. He relies on it to maintain control and ensure people adhere to what he believes is the right way to live, often ignoring the struggles of the people he's sworn to protect. Marcus, a young black boy without the resources to challenge the systems in place, has always felt the sting of Officer Johnson's assumptions. Yet despite Officer Johnson's harshness and prejudice, there's a small part of him that can't quite ignore Marcus's unwavering spirit. He may never admit it. But there are moments, rare, fleeting moments, when Officer Johnson can't help but wonder about the young boy's resilience. Still, those moments are overshadowed by the layers of bias and years of experience that color his every decision. To him, Marcus is just another child from the wrong neighborhood, someone who, in his mind, couldn't possibly rise above his circumstances. The paths of these two individuals are about to cross in a way neither could have predicted, and the consequences of their encounter will force both to confront their biases and assumptions about each other. The intersection of their worlds will bring to light the hidden truths that have long remained buried, forcing change and transformation in ways neither could have imagined. What would you do if you saw someone in danger, someone who had treated you with disdain and disrespect? Would you turn away, or would you rise above the hurt and act? For Marcus, a 10-year-old black boy, there was no question when he saw a police car overturned and engulfed in flames. Despite the officer inside being someone who had never shown him kindness, Marcus's instinct was clear: help without hesitation. As Marcus rode his bike down the quiet street, he noticed the smoke first, thick and black against the clear blue sky. A crash! A police car flipped onto its side, its sirens blaring uselessly as flames began to lick at the car's edges. The officer trapped inside screamed for help. Marcus's heart raced as he skidded to a stop. He knew exactly who that officer was, Officer Johnson, the same man who had looked at him with disdain every time their paths crossed, the man who had judged him solely based on his appearance, the color of his skin, the man who had never given him the benefit of the doubt. But Marcus didn't hesitate. His eyes went wide for a split second, but that moment passed quickly. The thought of leaving someone to die, no matter who they were, was not something Marcus could accept. With no time to second-guess, Marcus threw his bike to the ground and sprinted toward the burning car. His body was filled with adrenaline, his mind focused on one thing: getting Officer Johnson out before it was too late. He reached the driver's side of the car, feeling the heat from the flames and hearing the officer's muffled screams. Without thinking, Marcus yanked open the door with all his strength. The smoke made it hard to see, and the heat stung his skin, but Marcus didn't care. He reached inside, gripping Officer Johnson under the arms and pulling him with all his might. "Come on!" Marcus yelled, struggling to drag the officer free, the fire threatening to engulf them both. The officer's weight was heavy, and his movements were sluggish as he tried to regain his bearings. Marcus, with sheer determination, dragged the officer out of the car just in time as the flames roared behind them. He fell backward with the officer, landing on the ground with a thud, but he held on tightly to the officer's arm, making sure he was safe. The sound of the crackling fire filled the air, followed by the distant sirens of fire trucks and ambulances. Passers-by had begun to gather, staring in disbelief. A young black boy, barely old enough to be out on his own, had saved the life of the very officer who had always looked down on him. The crowd stood in stunned silence, witnessing the powerful moment of courage and kindness. "Where are you watching from, and what time is it?" someone asked, breaking the silence as a recording device was raised. "Do you think Marcus's bravery shows us the true meaning of courage and kindness? Share your thoughts below." The fire department arrived quickly, their hoses dousing the flames that had consumed the wrecked car. Paramedics treated Officer Johnson on the scene, his injuries minor but enough to require attention. He was shaken, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else. Gratitude, though he couldn't quite bring himself to say it. As Marcus watched the paramedics care for Officer Johnson, his heart was still pounding in his chest. He was scared, but his actions had been driven by something deeper, something that told him to help, no matter who it was. As the officer was helped into an ambulance, Marcus stood off to the side, his head lowered, unsure of what to feel. He had just saved the life of the man who had made his life harder in so many ways. It didn't make sense, but Marcus wasn't looking for answers. He was just looking for peace. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. People had seen Marcus's act of bravery and courage. What they hadn't seen was the pain he'd carried for so long, the prejudice and judgment that had been cast his way, just because of who he was. Today, Marcus had chosen to rise above that, showing the world that bravery isn't about titles or expectations. It's about the choices we make when faced with adversity. As Officer Johnson was driven away in the ambulance, his face still full of disbelief, Marcus stood there for a moment, watching him go. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about doing what was right. And today, Marcus had shown everyone what that really meant. The story of Marcus's bravery spreads like wildfire, reaching every corner of the neighborhood. People are in shock, trying to reconcile the image of a young black boy, no older than 10, rushing into the flames to save an officer who had consistently treated him with disdain. The community, once divided by their own prejudices, is now united in awe and respect for Marcus. They start to see him, not for his race or the assumptions they had once made about him, but as the hero he truly is. As news outlets begin reporting the incident, footage of Marcus pulling Officer Johnson from the burning car makes its rounds, further fueling the conversations. People gather, speaking in hushed tones, some inspired, others ashamed. The young boy they had once looked at with suspicion had just risked his life for the very person who had perpetuated their distrust. At the hospital, Officer Johnson slowly regains consciousness, the pain in his body, but a distant echo compared to the weight on his conscience. He's alone in his hospital room, the beeping of machines a constant reminder of his vulnerability. As the events replay in his mind, he begins to understand the full scope of what had transpired. He had been saved by the very person he had belittled, by a child who had seen him as more than just the uniform he wore. Officer Johnson's shame grows with each passing second. He begins to think about every encounter with Marcus, the dismissive stares, the harsh judgments, the moments when he had assumed the worst. He had treated Marcus like a stereotype, and Marcus had proved him wrong in the most profound way possible. The officer's guilt isn't easy to shake. How could he have been so wrong? The realization hits him like a ton of bricks. He had always assumed that Marcus's life was nothing but hardship, that he was just another black boy to be disregarded, a product of his environment. But Marcus had shown him that kindness, courage, and humanity can come from anywhere, no matter the circumstances. As he lays there in his hospital bed, Officer Johnson struggles with how to make amends, wondering if he'll ever be able to look Marcus in the eye and apologize for all the things he had failed to see. Days later, after he's discharged from the hospital, Officer Johnson knows he can't let this moment pass without taking responsibility. He requests a public forum, asking the local news to cover his apology. When he steps out in front of the gathered crowd, he feels exposed. His reputation, once built on authority and control, now fragile in the face of his own actions. "Marcus," he begins, his voice shaking slightly but steady with conviction, "I stand before you today, not just as a police officer, but as a man who has realized how wrong I've been. The words are hard to say, but they're the truth. I never thought I'd be saved by someone like you, and I was wrong." He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle. The crowd is silent, listening intently. "I treated you unfairly, and I allowed my biases to shape how I saw you. I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it." The air is thick with emotion as Officer Johnson continues, his words flowing more easily now, a sense of humility in his voice. "What you did for me that day was selfless. You showed bravery and kindness that I didn't deserve. I've spent my life in a job meant to protect people, but you've shown me that the true strength of a person lies in how they treat others, especially when it's hard." The community watches, a mix of surprise and hope in their eyes. It's clear that Marcus's act of bravery has opened more than just the eyes of Officer Johnson. It has opened the eyes of the entire neighborhood. People are beginning to question their own assumptions, and for the first time they are listening, not just to the officer, but to Marcus and the truth that was hidden beneath their preconceived notions. Marcus stands a few feet away, watching this exchange. He feels the weight of the apology, but more than that, he feels a quiet pride. The truth that had been hidden in his heart all along, about kindness, about fairness, was now standing before everyone. Officer Johnson had done more than apologize. He had admitted to his own shortcomings, and in doing so had made a statement that would echo far beyond this moment. The crowd begins to murmur, and a few step forward to shake Marcus's hand, to offer him words of encouragement. Marcus smiles, but he doesn't say much. For him, this was never about recognition. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered. And for the first time, he sees that people are willing to listen. In his small act of bravery, he had changed not only the life of an officer, but the way an entire community viewed each other. The aftermath of Marcus's heroic act reverberates throughout the community. His bravery becomes a beacon of hope, not just for his neighborhood, but for the entire city. The mayor, recognizing the significance of Marcus's actions, publicly commends him for his courage. The mayor's words resonate across the crowd. It's not every day that a young child steps forward with the strength and grace that Marcus showed. He's proven that heroism comes in all shapes and sizes, and his actions will inspire us for years to come. As the police department grapples with the fallout from Officer Johnson's actions, they begin to take serious steps toward change. The public apology from the officer, coupled with the community's overwhelming support for Marcus, forces the department to address the larger issue of racial bias and community relations. Officer Johnson, once a symbol of authority and control, now finds himself facing an internal review, while the department institutes mandatory racial bias training for all officers. The department also announces a new community outreach program, focused on building trust between officers and residents, particularly those from marginalized communities. Marcus's act of courage has sparked a movement for change within the very institution that had once failed him. Officers like Johnson, who had once been blind to their own biases, are now being asked to look inward and confront their actions. Meanwhile, Marcus's life takes an unexpected turn. Though he is still young, his actions have propelled him into the spotlight. He's awarded a bravery medal during a special ceremony at City Hall, attended by his mother, the mayor, and the police chief. The applause from the crowd is overwhelming as Marcus stands proudly, his face a mixture of shyness and pride. For a child who had never asked for recognition, this moment represents something much more profound, an acknowledgement of his character and heart. The medal, however, is not just a piece of metal. It's a symbol of everything Marcus has stood for: courage, integrity, and the refusal to let prejudice define his worth. The mayor speaks before the crowd, emphasizing how Marcus's selfless actions have changed the narrative of what it means to be a hero. This young boy, the mayor says, has shown us that the true measure of a person is not in their background or their skin color, but in their heart. Marcus is a reminder that we can all make a difference, no matter our circumstances. Following the ceremony, Marcus's story spreads throughout the media. Journalists cover his story in local newspapers and on news channels, highlighting his bravery and the lessons learned from his actions. Despite the overwhelming attention, Marcus remains humble, always deflecting the praise to others and stressing that his actions were simply what anyone should do in the face of danger. He is, after all, just a boy who saw someone in need and decided to act. But his newfound fame doesn't go to his head. Instead, Marcus becomes more determined to use his platform for good. He's invited to speak at local schools, where his message of kindness, courage, and empathy resonates with students of all ages. At each event, Marcus shares his story, reminding young people that they have the power to make a positive impact in their communities, no matter their age or background. "I didn't save Officer Johnson because of who he was," Marcus says during one of his speeches. "I saved him because he was a person, just like me. And when you see someone in trouble, you have to step up. That's what we're supposed to do for each other." His words inspire not only his peers but also adults who hear him speak. Teachers, parents, and community leaders find themselves reflecting on their own actions and biases. Many in the audience, especially those who work in law enforcement, express how Marcus's story has challenged their views, urging them to reconsider their approach to people in their communities, particularly Black children who have often been treated unfairly. As Marcus continues to share his story, he becomes a living example of the power of kindness and bravery. He proves that no matter your age or the challenges you face, you can change the world by doing the right thing. And for Marcus, that means using every opportunity to inspire others to act with courage, empathy, and a commitment to justice. For the community, Marcus's actions serve as a reminder of what can happen when we stand up against prejudice and act with integrity. The ripple effect of his bravery continues to spread, inspiring people across the city to work toward a future where everyone is treated with respect and fairness, no matter their race or background. The story of Marcus's bravery ultimately changes more than just the course of his own life. It changes the course of a community's history, reminding us all that a single act of courage can spark the transformation of a whole system. The neighborhood is forever transformed by the events that unfolded. Officer Johnson, once a symbol of authority who had perpetuated racial biases, is now an advocate for change. His perspective shifts dramatically after Marcus's brave actions, and he begins working alongside local leaders to rebuild trust within the community. His once rigid view of justice is replaced with a more empathetic approach, as he strives to repair the damage his actions may have caused. This transformation is a powerful testament to the ripple effect that a single act of bravery can have on those around us. Marcus, having become a local hero, represents a new hope for the community. His courage in the face of adversity not only saved a life, but also forced others to confront their biases and reassess how they treat those who are different from them. He embodies the future of a world where kindness and courage are the driving forces for change, no longer restricted by the color of someone's skin or their socioeconomic status. As Marcus walks home from school that afternoon, he feels a quiet pride. People greet him warmly, acknowledging his bravery. The once cold, indifferent looks he might have received are now replaced with nods of respect. As he walks past Officer Johnson, the officer gives him a silent, respectful nod. The small act of acknowledgement speaks volumes about the transformative power of Marcus's courage. What once seemed like a confrontation between two different worlds, one of prejudice and the other of injustice, has been bridged through one boy's decision to act with courage when no one else would. In the days that follow, Marcus becomes a symbol of what the community can become if they choose to rise above their biases and judgments. Schools invite him to speak about his experiences, and local organizations rally around him, eager to learn how they too can contribute to positive change. Marcus's voice, once that of a boy struggling to make sense of the world, now carries weight, inspiring the next generation to believe in themselves and to act with compassion. His courage has not only changed his own life, but the lives of those around him. Through his actions, Marcus has shown that no one is too small, too young, or too powerless to make a difference. The lessons he's taught are lasting ones that will resonate in the hearts of the people who live in his neighborhood for years to come. The final scene leaves a lasting image of hope and change. As Marcus walks through the streets, he's no longer just a boy on his way home. He is a symbol of strength, courage, and the power of one act to change the course of a community's future. And in the background, Officer Johnson, now a changed man, watches him with respect, realizing that true justice doesn't just come from laws, but from understanding and empathy. True courage is not just saving a life, it's changing the way we see each other. This final line encapsulates the heart of the story. That courage, especially when fueled by empathy and kindness, has the power to break down barriers, reshape relationships, and pave the way for a better, more understanding future. Marcus's legacy will continue to inspire the community, encouraging everyone to strive for justice and respect, no matter the circumstances.